you for joining today's conversation. So I'm going to speak about Islamic State Sahel Province, operating primarily in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Nigeria increasingly, or more recently, they have become much more active there. The states primarily affected by the ISSP threat uh, primarily uh, respond through military and security operations, both unilaterally and through occasional coordination between the three so-called IES states or part of the alliance of Sahel states. Although Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they have now announced the creation of a joint force called Unified Force of the Alliance of Sahel States, although it's still very nascent since it was announced in early October. Mali has also received support from Russian partners, initially the Wagner Group, and which subsequently transitioned to the Africa Corps. And where state presence is limited, these states have also relied heavily on local militias, for instance, in Burkina Faso, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, but also in Mali and Niger, there are ethnic and community-based militias, particularly operating in remote areas of these countries. However, it's necessary to kind of highlight that the main bulwark against ISSP expansion has been its jihadist rival, Jainim, or Jama Nusratul Islam al Muslimin. These groups, they fought intensively between each other between 2020 and 2023. However, more recently, they have prioritized fighting state forces and their allied militias instead of each other. However, as we speak, ISSP just launched an offensive against Jainim in northeastern Burkina Faso, especially since Jainim has expanded a bit in ISSP territory in the Seno province. Moreover, in Mali, ISSP has really consolidated influence or control in Mali's Menaka region, uh, and that is except for the regional capital of Menaka town itself. And that town has a very strong presence of the Malian Armed Forces, the Africa Corps, but also local militias such MSA and Gatia. And if any efforts have been conducted against the group, it has been primarily through drone strikes targeting the group's strongholds in in Akabar, in Araban, and Tabankort, which really are localities in the same general area of southern Menaka on the border with between Mali and Niger. And as a result of that, many of these drone strikes have been perpetrated by Nigerian forces because the threat really is something that affects northern Tillaberi in particular. And some, how could you say, punctual or sporadic operations have also resulted in the killing or capture of a few commanders and senior members of the group. However, it's really kind of the aerial operations that have taken the front seat in the efforts of Sahelian states. However, if we're going to speak about some of the successes of the Wagner Group before transitioning to the Africa Corps, it was putting also pressure on the Gao Ansongo Labbezanga axis, which really is the main road leading from the city of Gao in Mali to the capital of Niamey in Niger, and that has triggered defections in the ranks of ISSP. One of them, a particular commander named Ubel Borema, along with men loyal to him. And in addition to that, it has also been some friction between factions within the ISSP, which has resulted in occasional clashes and yeah, some internal tensions. However, this has not contributed to any broader fragmentation, but rather very kind of localized tensions, which is also something that is not maybe unusual for a group that is of the size of ISSP, which also have a very kind of large geographic scope, currently operating across 4 countries. But also shifting focus a little bit more to Niger, because even though not as affected as Mali and Burkina Faso in terms of the level of violence, it has demonstrated a certain degree of fragility since the 2023 coup with the ousting of President Bassoum. And this has led to, for instance, militiamen in northern Tillaberi, especially in the Banibango area, to defect to ISSP. And this is quite recent development in some way, but it's also because Banibango is located very close to ISSP strongholds on the Malian side of the border. And at the same time, during a recent attack in Banibango, the group didn't target any civilians, and it was basically a significant factor in that was that the defecting militiamen demanded that civilians won't be targeted when they conducted the attack. So that is quite interesting itself, that it has raised certain internal conversations within the group, especially since it has become more engaged in form of rudimentary governance in some parts of its areas of operations. And yeah, I think it also reflects like the continued military pressure by ISSP and the ongoing fragility of the Nigerian state. It is really stretched thin due to the multiple fronts engaged on. It has the Lake Chad Basin, Boko Haram insurgency, threats from the border along Libya, and also the Sahelian insurgency, as alongside banditry on the border with Niger. But combined, ISSP continues to operate as a very coherent force. This year, it has embarked on a kidnapping campaign targeting foreigners. It also increasingly directs its operations towards population centers. Recent US citizen kidnapping in Niamey kind of speaks to that, but also coordinated attacks in and around the town of Tillaberi, but also that it is entrenching itself in the borderlands between Benin, Niger, and Nigeria.